this stuff isn't working, we need to fix it. I used to remind them that winning in court is the booby prize. We're doing this because we want a really great outcome as we change the world. What screws up projects and organizational execution are late changes. The bird thought it knew it had nothing to do with what it was really having to deal with that day, which of course was the snake. When furniture starts getting thrown in the room, we don't have an uninterruptible power supply. We may lose all the samples and we'll slip a month. And the CEO who's spit his coffee out. How could this be the case? 3 weeks later, there was a power outage in Connecticut. Stuff that's in the irrecoverable remain hidden until you get to the irrecoverable or the very expensive.
Today we sit down with Adam Joseph, the mind behind the Risk Upfront methodology trusted by Apple, Microsoft, and high-stakes tech teams, who exposes the silent execution killers leaders miss until it's too late. Stay until the end to hear the counterintuitive habit he teaches executives to prevent million-dollar failures before they happen. This is the Inevitable Cast, sponsored by Inevitable Flow, where execution meets intelligent automation.
Welcome to the Inevitable Cast. This podcast is sponsored by Inevitable Flow, a consulting firm specialized in helping architecture, engineering, and construction companies achieve a predictable flow of qualified leads and scale their operations with intelligent process automation. Through AI-driven solutions, Inevitable Flow combines strategic prospecting with automation so that companies can increase revenue without relying solely on certain referrals or the need to hire large teams. To learn more and schedule a free consultation, just click in the link in the episode description. Our guest today is Adam Joseph. He's the founder of Risk Upfront, a methodology and consulting practice trusted by high-tech, industrial, and software teams to accelerate execution and eliminate late-stage surprises. Before founding Risk Upfront, which is formerly Celerity Consulting Group, Adam led engineering and product teams at Apple and Microsoft. And today, he helps companies transform the way they deliver complex projects by getting risk conversations upfront. Adam, it's a pleasure to have you here today. Thank you so much for joining us in the podcast. You know, you've worked at Apple and Microsoft and now built Risk Upfront. What pain or pattern did you keep seeing that made you dedicate your career to fixing execution?
That's a really great question about where this came from. What is the problem that got stuck in my head that caused me to want to talk about it and make a difference on it. And it actually really does go back to my work at Apple. I found myself, I was an engineering project manager in system software, and was getting the joint venture projects, particularly where Apple needed a Windows component for whatever it was doing. My first project was QuickTime for Windows, right, when they wanted to expand that to the platform. And then there was a bunch of other things and emulators and CPU stuff. And problems with getting projects done becomes more obvious when you're trying to do it with partners, particularly those that are across a P&L and through lower bandwidth conversations. You can't just assume the pheromones in the hallways will make it all work. And I was young enough and enthusiastic enough to say, this stuff isn't working, we need to fix it. And I became a voice on, I'm not, you can't put my name on those contracts unless it's constructed to be a success. I used to remind them that winning in court is the booby prize, right? We're doing this because we want a really great outcome as we change the world in terms of the products. And so I actually at some point was asked to literally write the book on how to do joint venture projects in at Apple. And that was where I had to take a step back and think about, well, how do you describe this problem in general? And what is it in our cruel entropic universe that gets in the way? And what are the simple things that need to be applied with rigor in order to uh, survive the storms of the universe conspiring against you? And then I carried that into Microsoft, and then I did a few startups. And then we founded Celerity Consulting, which, and I apologize, I'm confusing everyone except my existing clients. We are in the process of rebranding strictly to Risk Upfront, which is what our clients have been referring to us for 20 years. So we have conceded, and I just ordered the new business cards, and we're getting all that in place. So that's been a lot of fun.
Amazing. And I see in your background there is this snake and the bird in a red and black background, and I've also seen this symbol in your store in your marketing materials. Would you mind explaining to us what that means to you and to the Risk Upfront community?
Sure, sure. Well, part of our core theory of the case is that what screws up projects and organizational execution are late changes, which are typically surprises. They are, frankly, not the stuff the team was the most obsessed with. It was the stuff they had the least experience and was sitting in the blind spot, either completely in the blind spot or in someone on the project knew about it, but no one was talking about it. And so the core of our work is, how do you change the behavior and conversations and structures and practices of an endeavor such that you increase the likelihood that those hidden problems are exposed, at least so you can decide if you want to do anything about it. And we have a pretty good track record. So when I came across this graphic, which was in an article in 2009 about the 2008 financial crash, and basically what the lyrical nature, it was titled Unknown Unknowns, but the thing you want to read from this is the bird thought it knew what its problem of the day was, right? It's another day, another worm. I'm going to have to deal with that. And in reality, it had nothing to do with what it was really having to deal with that day, which of course was the snake. And so we got a license to use that in our materials. And then when it came time for us to write the book, we basically, went to our editors and said, we have the cover already. Now we need a book to put
Amazing.
behind us. And so we love that, and we even have it on a t-shirt.
Amazing, amazing. Well, I would say like the perceived reality of the bird, it's not exactly what's in the books for it, right? Like he said, oh yeah, I'm just gonna eat this worm here, but in fact, is the snake waiting. So I think that translates really well to the approach and the methodology that the value that you bring to companies is to try to spot the snake before the snake spots you, right? In my very simple
Good,
analogy.
that's a good way to put it.
Yeah. How would you describe, Adam, what you personally do when you step in with a team?
Well, there's a couple ways that we would engage with an organization. The classic model will always look like there is something that is very important to the company that has to get done. And we want to we perceive that we need to upgrade what we are doing. Whatever we did last time may be insufficient this time, because we always want to operate in the context of a real project, for want of a better term. So we are very unlikely to come in and say, let's train everyone in something and send them to a workshop, and that will be the added value. Let alone we're going to come in and drop off a PowerPoint and say good luck and God bless. And such. So we always want that context. And the three ways that, which is really a classic engagement model and really works, is we always want to talk and ask people what's working, what's not working, what would you like to see change tomorrow? Matter of fact, the expression I use, if the genie gave you two wishes, what would you ask her for that would be changed tomorrow? And essentially, this is, a discovery, and we clearly learn something, but the organization may not learn something. But the key thing is it shakes up the cynicism and resignation that teams may have that, well, it could never be any different. Then we want to introduce the distinctions of our core methodology, Risk Upfront, that will shift the nature of the conversation. And Risk Upfront is essentially four principles, four pieces of paper, and two meetings. But not all of that may get introduced depending on the engagement. And then once we do what we'll call some sort of workshopping phase, usually focused around a pilot project, then we will coach because you can only sing about architecture for so long when or you can only my coach would say you can only talk about rugby on a whiteboard for so long, and then you actually need to get out on the pitch and do it. And so we work with the teams as they're actually implementing it. And once you have an interesting pilot, then you can, if depending on the size of the organization, then you can decide what's the strategy to go wider and what things need to be modified or optimized for that organization. But we also engage, we do a really great job on offsites with executive teams and operating teams, but the three components are still there. And one of the things that we engender in the conversations, which you don't see enough in strategic planning and strategic offsites, is teams talking about, well, frankly, all the reasons they think they're gonna fail in such a way that it actually increases the likelihood of success. So even when we're just doing it around an offsite or a limited engagement, we want to leave the team with that power. And we also have ways to do it as a simple jump start on small projects and such. But if people ask how to describe what I do, it would be a coach would be I think, the most apt title, because at the end of the day, I am an unreasonable stand that my clients and teams do what they said they're committed to. And that's my job to support them.
I'm just doing an analogy here. It may be a very poor analogy, okay? But in that picture of the snake and the bird, we know that snake that is a rattlesnake that does that has the tail that makes a
Yep,
noise.
yep.
You're basically that tail that makes the noise so the bird can spot the snake, right? You help them understand it in that sense. So let's unpack a little bit how that looks inside your business, Adam. How does you mentioned briefly your methodology, and I want to unpack that a little bit. How does your method like coexist with frameworks like agile frameworks or stage gate without adding more process and overhead? Because I'm sure like the people that are involved, they're like, oh, here come this guy like adding a lot more to this, and like how do you coexist with the way companies work nowadays, especially the ones that apply these frameworks?
What's kind of ironic is that when we go into organizations that have existing processes, which we're agnostic on what our clients do. I spend about a third of my time in software, a third of my time in what we like to call high tech. These are my semiconductor, biotech, photonic, material sciencey companies, and then a third in random other things. Goldman Sachs is a longtime client of ours, and one of our crazy fintech execs got elected to Congress and asked us to work with his team because at the core of our work is how to build high performance teams. So we're not obsessed with a methodology. We are about how to jumpstart high performance teams and upgrade the organization's ability to perform. And when we walk into an organization that has existing structures, often when we come in, the process is this thick, and when we leave, it's this thick.
Mm.
Because, as I mentioned, risk up front is relatively thin. We work with Agile, we work with StageGate all the time, but we're shifting sort of the framework and the operating system that both underlies it and drives real behavior. Because the framework is how are we using these structures to identify and mitigate risks early? And some of it comes from the block and tackling of already established good practices, but now you're doing it for real. Like you need to bring rigor to identifying and bringing transparency to individual accountabilities, not because it's a great thing to have that checkoff mark on your process, but because ironically that is what helps vet out a bunch of hidden risks. And you
Mhm.
don't, these are don't know what you don't know conversations. And that's where it gets a little weird because teams know how to talk about what they know and they know how to problem solve with identified risks. But when's the last time they called a don't know you don't know meeting?
Right?
What would you put on the agenda?
I don't know.
Well, there is a lot of people are familiar with a particular type, which would be code reviews and design reviews, because a really good design review is everyone thinks that the design's done, but we have to have this review. And then someone starts talking, and then two slides in, a hand goes up and says, well, wait a second, don't you realize that can never work because of XYZ? And everyone goes, well, that's a don't know you don't know. What we do is how to bring that to the entire conversation, all the conversations on a project. And one of our clients once described us as we're the sriracha sauce that you spray on the team and the process so it actually does what you need it to.
The sriracha sauce analogy is a funny one. When you're doing this with a team, okay, what are early indicators that that tell you that a team is truly adopting the method versus just performing it?
Oh, well, if I'm involved and I'm in the room, performance gets beaten out pretty quickly.
Mm,
How do I know they're doing well? Well, frankly, when furniture starts getting thrown in the room, that we're having some of the hard conversations or uncovering some of the hard issues and truths that the team is surprised that this is really the case. One of my favorite stories is one of my biotech companies. This big, they're busy dealing with this whole metrology for identifying salmonella in the food supply, and we're at one of the, I mentioned there's two meetings. One meeting we call the weekly accountability meeting, the WAM, right? And one component they only take a half an hour. One component is everyone goes around and states what their biggest risk is. You're not asking, does anyone have any risks? You're asking, what is your biggest risk? And there's always an answer to that because if things are going great, you may hear about their biggest risk is the quality of the food. Or, in the San Francisco Bay Area, I'll hear about it. We're located on an earthquake fault, so there may be an earthquake. And there are real ways to mitigate all of that. But one junior lab tech raised their hand, went around and it was her turn. And she said, we don't have an uninterruptible power supply on the samples refrigerator. And so if there's a power loss, we may lose all the samples and we'll slip a month. And the CEO, who's on his smartphone listening to the meet, like spit his coffee out. Was like, how could this be the case? And how did this conversation not happen earlier? And he literally goes on and orders the power supply from the meeting. And as the universe would have it, 3 weeks later there was a power outage in Connecticut, and they had the power supply, so it all worked out. But that stuff, that supplies, and in the moment, it's a trivial thing to deal with. But as these things get later in the project, you're on an exponential curve that we describe as the cost of making a change. And so the consequence of
mm,
dealing with these surprises late gets more and more expensive, and in some points gets unrecoverable.
right.
So it's in that context that a team and an organization can decide we need to upgrade what's going on at the front of it and introduce these distinctions.
Amazing. That's a great example, Adam. And I once was introduced to a concept of like a chart that in one axis you had consequential and inconsequential, and on the other axis reversible versus irreversible. And the leadership and the decision makers, the CEO, they need to worry about the all the decisions that fall into the consequential and irreversible decisions, right? And you need to like take time and study and gather facts and evidence to make the best decision there. And anything, for example, that falls on the less consequential and more reversible side of the chart, you can delegate, or you don't need to worry about it so much, right? In terms of someone else can take care of it for you. So that's very interesting. In your words, I already hear a lot of this approach as well.
The first step of being able to leverage that curve is that stuff that's in the irrecoverable and consequential has to be identified. See, before you can brainstorm what to do about it, it's got to be distinguished from what's in the blind spot and made transparent so that you can actually decide what are we going to do given it's that important. And at the core of our work is that the biggest and the most life-changing consequence of the work is that it reveals the things that are in that quadrant that otherwise could easily remain hidden until you get to the irrecoverable or the very expensive in order to fix.
Exactly. You mentioned your risk upfront friendly intelligence engine, Rafi. Could we understand a little bit more of like how it helps teams articulate and prioritize risks?
Certainly. Well, it starts with the core methodology around the language of talking about risks. So the example I like to give is if I said to you, "I'm afraid I might get into a car accident," what would you say to me?
Well, use your seatbelt or make sure your car. I don't know, what would you say to you. I would say make sure you're driving safely.
Yeah, these are good ideas. You may even ask, well, why are you concerned about it? But I want to give you an alternate way that I can communicate that risk. The
Uh-huh.
tires on my car are balding. The tread is wearing thin. So I'm afraid I may get into a car accident and miss my $50,000 client meeting.
That's a
Okay.
much better statement.
Right. And because I've made it much more actionable, like you might come back immediately and say, well, get new tires. And then you may brainstorm some other things, but you have a context of what I'm saying. The normal way we talk about risks is we talk about the bad outcome we're concerned about. The design isn't going to work, or we're not going to get the parts in time. But any belief we have about the future is actually rooted in an assessment we have on the present. And that is what causes us to worry. So if we're worried about the parts coming in time, there's some reason in our past experience that has us have that specific concern. And it might be, well, the last project, the parts came in 2 months late, or we're using a new supplier, or the part is particularly difficult and the supplier has no experience with it. Those are facts. Those are things that exist now. All right. We call this language structure cause, effect, impact. So the cause must be a present tense fact, essentially. The effect is your possible bad outcome, and the impact is why it's consequential to the business. So that would give you where it shows up on your consequential or inconsequential curve. Right? So slip the project by 6 months, or we will lose customer X, etc. So what Ruffy is we have designed, this is our play. It's in this world of AI, it's important for those of us that managers or coaches or consultants, we need to go back to our building phases because the tools are coming at us fast and furious. And we need some experience. We need to look for excuses on how to use these and how to leverage these for our day-to-day work that we already have a solution for. So that was what caused me to take on, load up the GitHub and the Visual Studio and play with Copilot. We've created an AI engine where you can enter your risk and it will coach you. Well, first it will grade you, and then it will coach you on how well articulated it is using the cause effect impact structure. And we have a bunch of prompt and rubric definitions that are part of the system. But I also took on creating a training set. So we have some machine learning and primitive neural network recognition going on as well. And we are prototyping that with various clients, and it's makes for a fun demo.
Wow, that is quite incredible. And it's definitely, technology on that front is developing rapidly. And since you mentioned it, what's your view, Adam, on AI of like AI in execution, right? Like you gave a good example now. But let's say, Copilot that guide meetings versus, dashboards that just observe, right? Can you expand a little bit more on like what your view on the like how AI can impact execution for companies?
Well, I mean, that is a huge that is not just a podcast episode, that is an entire podcast, right? But I'm really focusing on what you're saying around execution. So I think one of the best ways to think about AI is not about replacing roles, but really what are the tasks that it can do, particularly around bottlenecks. So if you look at something that is just causing a bottleneck, like I have to spend, it takes me 2 days to get the meeting notes out, right? Well, of course you can have AI take a transcript and produce meeting notes that you can review. One of the things that I always coach new managers, one of my favorite pieces of wisdom is delegate what you're great at. That's when you're starting to manage people, because it's the easiest stuff that you can teach other people. You'll be the fastest in figuring out if it's wrong, and you'll be very efficient in coaching it because it's an area of expertise. And the reality is, as you grow up in the organization is counting on you solving the new problems and such. So think of AI as a junior employee that, you know, I know how to create great meeting notes and I'm going to delegate that. But I need to be there to review and coach because I'm still accountable that the right meeting notes go out. But the other thing, and this is it's the buzzword that it's the particular thing that we're all beginning to learn about, and it's becoming leveraged, and that's the world of agents, where you're not just using AI in a deterministic take transcript, produce meeting notes, send out email. You are saying take the meeting notes, decide who needs to see these, and then send them to the right people. So there is a logic of decision making and analysis. So take your particular execution, and you're going to find places where having an agent to do that becomes very useful. And that could be, look, I see it, on my software folks. It's just one of the great leverage points is it can help. Well, I'm sort of back to the general AI. Give it a bunch of legacy code, and it can help you understand the spaghetti and what's going on there, and even convert it into a modern language. And the agent part of it is it's iterating. It's iterating. Like it will take its first shot at porting it to a new piece of software, a new language. But until it gets the exact results of the old system, it knows it needs to keep changing and evolving the code. But there's a lot of data when I work with high-tech companies, especially in the realm of deep software and, excuse me, deep hardware and advanced technology. My semiconductor companies that are analyzing the physics of plasma. There's a lot of lab data that you need to see in a range of ways in order to make the next decisions. And AI can be a very powerful tool in taking the flood of data and helping you make those decisions so that you know how to move on. Beyond that, you get into the specifics of what are you trying to execute on. So you're seeing it make a big difference in people generating communication and marketing communication, or helping optimize supply chain or parts decisions. And again, where you have a bottleneck, this is where the place to look to see where AI can be of assistance.
Yeah, well said. I couldn't agree more, Adam.
You
But
know what? Let me mention something. What led to Ruffy was I would in my coaching be spending a lot of time in meetings coaching people when they're coming up to speed on how to effectively use the cause effect impact structure. And that would take up time in the meeting and create bottlenecks. It would, the joke was if Adam's on the call, it's going to take 15 minutes longer, and as it should. There's you're rewiring muscle memory, but
yeah,
now people can go and test their risks on the automated system and say, okay, yeah, you're right. I should get more specific here, or I haven't quantified this, and that saves time in the meeting. I'm involved. Dartmouth has adopted Risk Upfront for its engineering school in what they teach students to do their senior capstone projects, and University of Maryland is using it in their business school on the entrepreneurship program. And they were running an experiment between AI augmented coursework and non-AI augmented coursework. And when I was brought in to give the talk on cause effect impact, I could immediately see that the AI assisted team was further along in how to leverage risk upfront and talk about their risks, because as part of their assignment, they ran their risks through the Ruffy engine, and the conversation was able to start at a higher level than the team that was not able to do that.
I mean, these are all great examples, and I couldn't agree more with all of them. But here's the provocation, okay? If you had to pick one, better tools or better team habits, which moves the needle faster, in your opinion?
Oh, that's a no-brainer. It's the better habits. Uh, that's almost a softball to throw because we are still getting things done with human beings, and God, we're seeing the hangover of billions of dollars over the last decade spent on bringing tools in that are not making the difference that was intended. And this has caused a little rebellion from companies, especially now when money isn't free anymore, and they're just tired of having these huge technology implementations, but they failed to get the win on it because human beings will keep doing what human beings do. This reminds me of a project I did several decades ago with Power New Mexico. They were bringing in a PeopleSoft HR system that they needed to do, frankly, to allow them to do mergers and acquisitions. And through the risk upfront process, they realized the biggest risk was that they roll out this software and people still pick up the phone to call the HR helpline instead of using the self-service system. This is a while ago. And
Right.
so all of a sudden they realized the most important thing was to get started on training and figure out how that would happen.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, we're going to wind up with an expensive system that no one will use because they do it the way they've always done it.
Right. Exactly. And in talking about challenges, just like you mentioned, I want to ask you this: when organizations they resist adopting new execution habits, I'm sure you have gone through this over and over again. But like, what form does that resistance take? Is it like data silos or like incentive misalignment or maybe time pressure? How do you see this taking form within an organization?
Well, what you've described are sort of reasons why change in behavior may have difficulty, which it absolutely does. I mean, our many glib expressions, one of our many glib expressions is what you know has nothing to do with what you do. Because if it did, no one would be left smoking in the world, right? We would all be eating healthier and at the gym more. And here's the bad news. Reading one more health report is probably not what would make the difference. So you need to recognize and have a sense of humor that if you're going to change, you require what I would describe as structures and practices. And structures are allocations of resources or new processes. And practices are things that you do, you could call them rituals, but you do them periodically with integrity or triggered with integrity. So if you talk to someone who's actually training for a marathon, they're quite clear. You run 10 miles a week, whether you think you need to or not, and you get out there, you get to the gym 3 times a week, whatever that has to look like. And those are the people that actually get the stuff done.
Big-headed discipline.
Yes, this is, it's well established. Just get a good habit in place and the nonlinear wins will follow. This also gets into the world of chaos and complexity theory of what makes complex adaptive teams more effective, which is something very near and dear to my heart and where Risk Upfront comes from. And we are living in more and more complex times where are particularly volatile, pick it economics, politics, societal shifts. AI deserves its own line item. And what do you do in the face where your uncertainties have uncertainties around them? And it actually is a place to look for good habits that allow you to probe, identify, continuously improve, and experiment and learn from good experiments that succeed and experiments that fail. And that's how you navigate a complex world like this.
Right. I couldn't agree more. Now, Adam, let's, we're getting to the end of this episode, and I want to look into the future with you a little bit more, okay? You're rebranding from Celerity Consulting to Risk Upfront. Beyond the name, what will feel different for clients in the next year?
I think we're going to have a more interesting product mix that really allows us to focus on the IP and give alternate engagement models. And Risk Upfront is a registered trademark, and we get to use, our clients really refer to it as rough. Is that a rough project? Are we going to? So we get to do, a rough start, which is a way to engage with us really over a week with several remote agile type meetings that allow some of these things to get in place. We obviously have Rough AI, of which Ruffy is the first one that we're doing. And we will learn from our clients about what's the best way to deliver it and have fun with that. But we're lucky. Look, we've been doing this for 25 years. I mentioned that there's 4 principles: accountability, transparency, integrity, and commitment, with very specific definitions that, when used and operationalized, are critical to the outcomes that I've described. And that stuff doesn't change. And how to engineer that into the organization is what we're really good at, what we're world class at, and have a track record on. And it's what allows me to describe what I do as a vocation as opposed to simply a job or a career. I do it. Sometimes I like to glibly describe that I get to work with world-class experts, helping them get things done even in the face of their humanity and in a cruel entropic universe.
That is an amazing statement, Adam. So, what's next? Is it like expanding the Ruffy platform, or maybe training network, or maybe publishing more of your frameworks through content? What is your main goal for the coming year?
We are a big fan of real person-to-person coaching. And so that will continue to be at the core of our business. But going back to the bottlenecks, we will look where there are bottlenecks and things that can make it easier and more accessible for our clients, and we will leverage those. But you're always going to see me showing up and having direct conversations with teams and executives because it's a human game.
Amazing. And I always, like to end this podcast with a question that you are familiar with because you mentioned it in the beginning with the genie, but I actually use a different magic device, which is a wand. So, Adam, you've achieved a lot with Risk Upfront and Celerity Consulting Group so far. If you could have a magic wand and remove one obstacle holding you back today, what would that be?
It would be that more people can get the power of what we do in such a way that they're empowered to take this on and change their organizations.
That is amazing. And I want to ask you this. What is one piece of advice you would give to a company executive that is looking into revamping or making their execution better?
The core thing on risk up front that you want to keep in mind is recognize you're on that cost of making a change curve, and you need to fund and empower your people to invest upfront in exploring what the real solutions are and what the real risks are. And one thing I would remind them of, when there's no room for a no, then a yes is meaningless. So you're probably under leveraging the wisdom of your teams, and you've got to get that wisdom on the core problem at the front end.
Amazing. Adam, with that, I finished this episode and I appreciate your presence here today and all the insights you've shared with us.
It was a pleasure. Thank you so much. It was a lot of fun.
That's it for today's episode of the Inevitable Cast. This podcast is sponsored by Inevitable Flow, a consulting firm that helps architecture, engineering, and construction firms generate a steady stream of qualified leads and scale their operations with AI and intelligent process automation. If you'd like to explore how these strategies can work for your business, click the link in the description to book a free consultation. See you next time.